So I'm going to talk to you about strategic operations management. And just to let you know a little bit about who I am, beyond what Raj just said, professor at the business school that's been studying operations management at sort of at a very high level strategic um, viewpoint for 30 years now. And so the advantage of that is that I've had the opportunity to watch companies come and go based on their operations. And what I'm fascinated about is how companies use operations to gain a strategic advantage in the marketplace. Um, and so I don't know, in terms of setting expectations, this is very much similar to the kind of material I would teach in a graduate level MBA course or an executive MBA course, possibly in the executive program here at Wharton, where what I'm trying to do is provide you guys with a framework for thinking about what is strategic operations, right? So that you can take them back to your industry and be creative to see how you can use operations to gain some advantage in the marketplace. So let me give you starting off with a definition. What's op strategy? High level, so we're not talking about tactical decisions. Long run, so we're not talking about short-term decisions. On the selection of management resources, labor and capital. So who do you hire to work for you? What machinery, what equipment, what capital do you have? All to satisfy customer needs. That's what operation strategy is at a very, very high level. But let's dive down. I'm going to kind of go from high level just to, I'm going to stay high pretty much throughout the whole presentation here. But I'm going to start working way down, and then eventually I'm going to get into very specifics. Okay. As I'm going along, feel free to raise your hand. Just interrupt me if you've got questions, comments, reactions, or throw something into the chat. I'll be sitting there looking at it also at the same time. So business models gets thrown around a lot. Everybody has a different idea what a business model is. This is what I think of a business model. Essentially, it has two components. You've got the revenue model that talks about how a company actually generates revenue. And that revenue is to buy resources, labor and capital. You then utilize those resources in a way in which you've now organized your supply, which is sort of you delivering value to your customers. If you deliver value, which I view value in terms of satisfying needs, and you do it in a transactionally efficient way, meaning it's easy to do business with you if you are transactionally efficient. Things show up on time, it's easy to explain, there's no errors, there's no corrections need to be done, and the product that you deliver actually satisfies the needs. And so if you generate some value, then you can extract that revenue, and this is what creates a profitable business cycle. A revenue model that generates extracts the value generated by the customer, buys the resources you need, you organize them efficiently to generate the most efficient, to generate the most valuable needs in the marketplace. Right. So let's focus more on what that supply side is, right? Because that's the ops side. I also happen to be a marketing professor, and so when I talk marketing, I'm almost always on the revenue side. But when I'm doing ops, we're talking about the supply side. Okay. So when you're thinking about operation strategy, I want you to be thinking about three things, right? The capacity that you choose, where you put them, and how much control you have over it. So I call it process capacity, location, and control. Those three things pretty much cover the key strategic supply decisions every company makes. And the combination of those is going to influence the model you're going to have, and then how effective you'll be in the marketplace. So in terms of capacity, I'm thinking about how much buffer you have, how flexible is that capacity, and when do you activate it? And I'll explain what I mean more specifically. Location, that's just where you put it. And that might seem like a really simple thing, but essentially there's a fundamental trade-off. If you're far away from your customers, you build economies of scale. That lowers your costs. If you get closer to customers, you're faster to respond to their needs. And there's the trade-off right there. And no company has this, every company has to decide where on that trade-off spectrum they want to be, and there's no single optimal. And I'll talk about different companies and how they've positioned themselves. And then control is super huge. Like, if you control a resource, you get to decide what to do with it, when to do with it. It's kind of like if you own a car, you get to decide when you're going to drive a car. If you rent a car, well, that's only if it's available and it's at a certain price. It's the same thing when you're talking about delivering value. Do you own the asset, at which point you're on the hook for utilization, and you can control it? You can standardize, you can get more flexibility and more standardization from it. And standardization helps you to lower costs, but it then also limits the scopes of the needs you can satisfy. Another trade-off. So taking all that, if you are a company that combines novelty in your supply with the novelty and the needs you satisfy, you can create an interesting business model. Usually, really successful business models involve some kind of what I call a smart sacrifice, which means you sacrifice some dimension of need in order to excel in another dimension. And that trade-off, nobody thought would made sense. You come along, you present that trade-off to the marketplace, and all of a sudden you start to become a dominant player, right? So this curve essentially, I've already started talking about trade-offs. This is probably the most fundamental trade-off in all of operations, which is you have to pick how much capacity you're going to have. And you can have just enough or you can have lots, right? And what happens is as you add more capacity, capacity waits for customers. It's basically you just have lots of buffers and capacity is sitting around waiting for your customer. That means idle time, that's costly, that's inefficient. But that means your customers wait less. So where do you want to be on that spectrum? Well, if you're an emergency room, you're going to be here, where customers are not waiting and you've got lots of idle capacity, to the bane of every chief financial officer of a hospital. A trauma center cannot tell a gunshot wound patient, oh, we've got 2 in line, don't worry, we can get to you next week. The customer is not allowed to wait. Therefore, you have to have the capacity waiting for the customer. But you're Boeing, you're all the way at the other end. The airlines will wait years for their aircraft because you do not want to have any idle capacity on that assembly line because those planes are already hard enough to make and expensive enough to make. So you make your customers wait. Where you're going to be on that spectrum really depends on how the customer views waiting versus the cost of having your assets wait for them. And companies will make different trade-offs, and the appropriate trade-off will change over time. Okay, so here let me just give you a very, very basic example of that. I did this project with this company, which I'll call Calzo Retailing, and they didn't want to reveal their names, and so I'll just kind of go with this fake name. But it's a department store well, they go in malls and they sell fashion apparel, right? And they have a trade-off. They could use full-time employees or they can use part-time employees. Full-time is you have more control over full-time. You can think of it as owning the asset. Part-time is more flexible. And the problem is it's hard, if you own the asset like a full-time employee, it's hard to utilize them. So your labor costs basically is strictly increasing in full-time employees. And the number of part-time hours you need is just strictly decreasing. So you look at this and you say, well, why would you even have any full-time employees if your labor costs are minimized? Well, the trade-off is that part-time employees are not great at managing customer service. And so you have to find this delicate balance. But is the answer no full-time employees? No. Is the answer as many full-time employees as possible? No. And every retailer out there is struggling with what's the appropriate level of flexibility to have. So let me kind of go through now some companies that have done some process innovations that I find interesting and also have been successful. So let me talk about Dell. Dell, as most of you probably know, Dell is a manufacturer of computer hardware, started in a dorm room in University of Texas, apparently. Their big innovation was, instead of having computers wait for customers, They only made the computer after the customer ordered it. So they had the customer waiting for the computer. And before that, IBM, Compaq, Gateway, HP, all of them, they just assumed that you had to have computers waiting for customers, not the other way around. Well, what Michael Dell discovered with his is that, man, you can really expand the variety and you don't hold any inventory costs. And in this game, inventory was money, and that was a big deal. In fact, it's hard to think of Dell as being a titan of industry right now. They're a credible company, of course, don't get me wrong, but in the 1990s, their market cap increased more than any other company. They were the company of the 1990s. And it was essentially and based on this one idea. Their technology wasn't any really different than anybody else's technology. It was just their process. They decided to innovate on the process capacity spectrum. Here's another company I've studied. If you're in San Francisco, you know about Timbuktu because they're based out of San Francisco. Make-to-order bike messenger bags. They decided, okay, you know what we got to do? We're going to do the Dell model essentially in this industry. And they went to full customization, which allowed you essentially no finished goods inventory and no cost of having to mark down. But the customer had to wait, and you had to manufacture in San Francisco, which was expensive. So the trade-off was customers waited, your efficiency of manufacturing wasn't as good, but people got a customized bag where they're willing to pay $150 a bag. And so there you go. You have a little bit of a nice business model out of that. Let's talk about location. There are companies that go closer to the customer, and then there's companies that go further away from the customer. This is a kind of a fun company, Redbox. It's kind of the idea of renting DVDs is kind of antiquated at this point. They're actually still around. But for many years, I watched Blockbuster, and everybody would say Blockbuster is a company that's going to go poof, and they didn't go poof. They stayed around, and they were big. And then all of a sudden, what happened? It was about 3 months, and they went poof. They just disappeared. And the problem was they weren't far enough away from the customer or close enough away to the customer. Redbox's great idea was move your inventory closer to the customer. No store employees, no stores, fast-moving inventory. But as you move closer to the customer, you lose economies of scale. As you lose economies of scale, you cannot provide variety, and so limited variety. A trade-off that they made, but it was a smart trade-off. Now, there's this other company that people have probably heard of that's been doing pretty well recently that did the opposite, which was Amazon. They moved away from the customer. They took the Barnes and Noble bookstores, and they decided, you know what? That's not good. Those books are too close to the customers now. Let's move them all to Seattle. That was the beginning model, right? And so when you move away, you gain economies of scale. No store employees, no store, fast-moving inventory, and absolutely tremendous variety. You can profitably sell niche products when you have economies of scale that you cannot if you move your inventory too close to the customer. How many niche products are there out there? Well, it turns out a lot. A lot of niche products are out there. However, a bit of a trade-off. You move product away from the customer has to wait, and it's expensive to ship to them. And how big is that trade-off? Well, let me show you data. All right. This is one of I'm going to show you some data now that's going to compare from Amazon.com against Walmart. Walmart's the 800-pound gorilla in the industry. Amazon is quickly becoming the 800-pound gorilla, but let me just rewind the clock and go back to 2009 when Walmart was a $406 billion company. That's more than $1 billion of sales a day. And Amazon is 25 billion at that time. It was nothing, right? 25 billion. And what do you see? They had this thing called fulfillment. 8% of their cost was from fulfillment. Net income about 4 pennies on the dollar. Oh, look at that. Walmart, 4 pennies on the dollar. Amazon was making about as much money as Walmart on every dollar sale, except Walmart was able to sell $406 billion versus 25 billion for Amazon. Time goes on, and what happens? Amazon's fulfillment costs, they don't get smaller. They just get bigger. Amazon got bigger, and they're spending more money to get closer to you. And what's interesting is their net income, well, Amazon was a great charity back then. They really did not make any money. They were just providing value to consumers without generating any rents. Walmart, to their credit, was consistently earning 3 pennies on the dollar. So then what kept happening? Well, Amazon, well, they're still growing. Walmart, of course, wasn't growing nearly as fast, but at least Walmart was still producing 3 pennies on the dollar of income. And Amazon, no, they weren't making much money. It's not very much money at all. And the cost of shipping products to consumers going up and up and up. So as of 2019, I just want you all to realize Amazon was pretty pathetic. They kept promising that they were eventually going to make money, and they didn't. But what's interesting about what Amazon was doing here is they were moving closer to the customer. They were building warehouses closer and closer, and they were going from 5 days delivery to 2-day delivery to next day to delivery. And that's why their fulfillment costs were coming up. But their margins were also getting better. And that was a very encouraging sign. And so what do you have now? Well, Amazon, of course, is printing money hand over fist. And they have completely changed their business model. They've moved from keeping inventory far away from the customer, which has long lead times, to moving inventory close to the customer with short lead times. And why do they do it? Because customers are willing to pay that. Amazon can then charge them a premium. And finally, if I showed you the 2020 and 2021 numbers, you would notice that they're actually starting to make money. And what's amazing is that, COVID hit, everybody had to buy on Amazon. They're now bigger than Walmart. So the growth trajectory at Amazon is incredible. But Amazon has completely changed their business model from their original position, moving inventory closer to the customer. As far as I can tell, this is going to be a clash of titans because Amazon has as it moved closer to the customer, Walmart has been backing up. They've been improving their e-commerce operations and moving away. And so the two companies are converging. And when you have two stars that are converging in a universe, interesting things start to happen. The first rule of competitive dynamics is you don't want to be like your competitor, but both these guys are moving into each other's space. The next 5 years will be fascinating. So another one of my favorite companies is Zara. Hopefully many of you know what Zara is. They're a fashion apparel retailer. They happen to be the world's largest fashion apparel retailer. And what did they do? While everybody was producing in Asia, low-cost countries, they decided to produce in Spain and Morocco and Turkey and Egypt and other sort of higher cost locations. So they sacrifice cost. They just had they have higher costs. But they can produce new styles within several weeks because their production is closer to the customers. And because of that, they don't make fashion risks. They don't have to bet on fashion because they know what's going to sell in the next couple of weeks. And so what's in Zara is always fashionable. And so this graph I got this off of a consultant, which I thought was great because it really captures the difference between Zara and their competitors in many dimensions. So if we look at units per square foot on the x-axis, Zara is they're making more efficient use of their real estate. Their cost of goods sold, higher than the typical person because they have to manufacture locally. That's the sacrifice. Their regular price up front, lower. They don't charge as much up front. Their prices are good. And you think, well, okay, that's not a good recipe. Lower prices and higher costs. Well, this is an example where they make it up in volume because their fashion is always fresh and it's always changing. Customers come in, and if they see it at $85, they buy it because they know it's not going to go on sale because Zara doesn't buy excess inventory because they don't have to because they've produced locally. Consequently, they make a lot of sales at full price, and they make it up in volume. Let's look at the pattern here. This is 2002 to 2018. This is Zara. Well, Inditex, the parent company. Gap, that's another San Francisco company. Boy, I feel sorry if you're the Gap. They just cannot figure it out. They cannot get their ops to work. They were the world's largest fashion apparel retailer. They've lost that crown many years, more than a decade ago, and it doesn't look like they're having any hope of getting it back. Inditex is their competitor is Fast Retailing, which is out of Japan. It's called Uniqlo. Is their main brand. They're basically a Zara company they don't do as high-end fashions. I call Inditex, I call Fast Retailing the Gap done right. Sort of basic apparel with higher tech fabrics, which fast production runs. H&M was also a big competitor, but H&M, I don't know about them anymore. If you notice, their margins have been falling over time, and there's some storm clouds on the horizon for H&M. They haven't quite figured out who they want to be. Inditex and Zara has got one business model, hasn't changed it, unlike Amazon, which has changed it. But Inditex has got this model, they figured it out, and they're milking it. Okay, so what was my third dimension of big strategy? So remember I told you process capacity is kind of things like, do you make stuff before the customer wants it or after? Do you have lots of buffer, which means capacity has to wait for customers, or do you make customers wait for your capacity? Then there was location. Close to the customer, you lose scale, but you get fast response times. Far away from the customer, less responsive, more scale, more variety. What does the customer want to pay for? The third category is process control. How much control do you want over your process? And one reason why you might want control is because you can standardize. If you control a process, you can design the process in such a way that it's completely standardized. And the classic example of this is McDonald's. You don't hire people and let them decide how long to cook the hamburgers. You standardize it in such a way that they don't make decisions. And because they're not making decisions, you can have higher conformance quality. You don't need to hire high-skilled labor because the job that you've done is standardized, which can therefore limit the cost that you're offering. You don't offer a lot of variety. You offer the Big Mac, and that's about it. You don't get to customize like at Burger King. And you certainly have no performance quality. Nobody's going to claim that McDonald's has the best hamburger out there. But boy, you can make a business model out of this. So to me, one of the challenges going forward is I'll take two of our largest industries in the United States right now is healthcare and education. Both are highly unstandardized processes. We can also talk about building construction, another highly unstandardized process. Somebody is going to figure out how to standardize those processes and make a killing out of it. Then there's this issue of contract manufacturing. If you're from the Bay Area, I'm sure you're much more familiar about contract manufacturing than most of my typical students I deal with. There's a company called Foxconn, Hanhai Precision Industries. They've been doing pretty well. They're up to about, well over, they're like $200 billion company, world's largest contract manufacturer. They just make stuff for other people. That's their main thing right now. They don't get large margins, but boy, if you own of Hanhai, I'm willing to take 6% margins on $200 billion. And their largest customers is Apple. So don't tell me that you have to make your stuff in order to be successful. You can, if you standardize your processes, you can relinquish control, and therefore you can take advantage of the fact that Hanhai can do this cheaper than Apple can even do it. Now, this a company that's another Bay Area company that has been struggling with this issue of control is Intel. Intel has always felt like they had to keep control over their manufacturing processes. And as a result of that, they've struggled with their manufacturing processes. And they've kind of come to the realization that they need to start outsourcing a little bit. And otherwise, that control is not buying them as much as they had thought that was buying them in the past. So here's a very successful company who prided themselves on integrating design with manufacturing and thought that that was an advantage. And it was. But the technology has changed, and integrating manufacturing with design in semiconductors is not as important as it used to be. Therefore, the ops strategy has to change where they give up more control. All right, another company out of San Francisco that you might have heard of is Uber. What is Uber, essentially? Well, it's a company that did an interesting thing. They also don't have control. So I talked about, if you talk about Zara as a company that has a lot of control, they own their own manufacturing process. You have McDonald's has a lot of control, super successful with being high on the control spectrum. And then you have a company like Uber that doesn't want to even consider these drivers employees. They don't want control. So they can't standardize the vehicle. They can't tell the drivers when to work. They can't tell them how to greet the customer. They can't give them any training because they're not employees. They're contractors. So if you're a customer of Uber, you have no idea what you're getting into. You're getting, well, except you're gonna, kind of have an expectation that you're gonna get transportation from A to B, and you're not gonna have to pay as much as you would if you were doing a taxi, and the car is gonna be available to you. So the Uber sacrifices control in order to get to excel in terms of the service of going from A to B efficiently with a fast response time. So let me kind of wrap up here because I wanted to leave a little bit of time if to sense there's any discussion that comes out of this. Is what are some of the high level key strategic decisions that you make in operations, right? I mean, the tactical things are like, how many people do you have working on Monday, and how many units do you order for, how many components do you order from supplier B this quarter, and those are tactical decisions. I'm talking about more like, how do you set up your company, and are you a company that has lots of buffers? Are you a company that only takes orders and then fulfills them afterwards? Or do you build it to inventory, right? Are you a company that locates your processes close to customers? Or are you a company that locates them far away, domestically or internationally? And then how much control do you want over your process? A lot of people like to have control. They don't realize that control comes with a big cost. And so getting that control trade-off is important. And really successful companies sometimes come in and do stuff that you just would not expect. Another sort of innovation I like to talk about is Zipcar. It's not as timely as it used to be, but in the old days, when you rented a car, you had an employee who would hand you the key, and the employee would clean the car, and the employee would make sure there's gas in the car, fuel in the car. Zipcar, none of that happens. That's all done by the other customer. Much less control of the process. You wouldn't necessarily think that would work, but it did. Locations, Hertz and Avis and National, they were at the airport. Zipcar was at your, right around the corner from you in your urban area. So they changed location, they changed control, and they created an interesting new business model. And that's basically what I see every time a new company comes in. You can always point to one of these three elements where they've made some innovation that suggests that they've done something different than what everybody else has done in the past. So, all right, that's kind of what I wanted to say in terms of giving you a flavor for this. Let me kind of stop sharing here and just kind of go to the screen. And we got a small group today, and I've been doing all the talking. So I don't know. Does anybody have any reactions about this? You can tell me this is all BS if you want. I can handle that. Or you can say, oh, no. Well, how about this? Or what's your reactions on the various dimensions? Jason, I see a hand up. You popped up on the video and you had a hand up. And what do you want to say?
Yes, Professor, thank you very much. Very interesting discussion. I am operational executive in Silicon Valley. So a lot of this stuff I know, but you're putting into a very good frame of work that I certainly appreciate it, and that I can use the material that presented to the CEOs in a very concise way. That's what I find out. Very beneficial, very good. So I do have a question for you. There are models out there that, because I deal with a lot of stuff happening in China, and there are specific companies out there that I know the executive of, and they are very much when I talked to them, they said, well, yeah, because the market nature in China and the business model, because you can actually study business model and copy that. So it happens a lot and happen very fast, especially in the product and business model side. So one of the things they talked about is speed, execution speed, and doing everything faster. A company like Tencent and company like Xiaomi, I'm sure you heard of those names, and company like Huawei. And Huawei is really an amazing company because they are under the watchful eyes of the U.S. government, but they do a lot of things really, really, really well. And I heard many, many stories. I also heard some other bad stories about them. But one question I have for you is, you talk about location control and all that element stuff that changing the business model. What do you think of speed comes into play? And can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, definitely. So first thing I should say is when I was young, I mean, let's say 30 years ago, what were people saying? Everybody's got to go faster. Everybody's got to go faster. Everything has got to be faster. And so the thing that's kind of funny is that that's what they're saying today too. And so this need this feeling of having to be faster almost feels like we're on a treadmill here. Like that never go. We never get fast enough. It's every company in every decade, it always seems like they're striving to be more responsive to the market, quicker to the consumer, quicker with new products, etc. And frankly, I get used to seeing the sun rise in one corner of the world, and it keeps rising in the sun. I'm not sure that that trend's going to change anytime soon. So let's take a company that I follow a lot. It was the Amazon. They used to deliver in 5 days, and then it went down to they would advertise, "Wow, we could deliver in 2 days," and then it became 1 day, and then it became 2 hours. And at what point does it become we're delivering in 20 minutes or 15 minutes, right? Soon. I don't think that's any time that's going to change anytime. That's the pressure, right? It's constantly to go faster. One thing that I have also noticed is that if you're going to go faster, you do have to sacrifice on some stuff. And the one thing that usually gets sacrificed in is product variety, because if you're going to get faster, that means you have to pre-position product closer to customers. You have to have assets that can produce quickly to what the customers want. And variety makes it much more difficult to do that. And so let's take, for example, Dell versus Apple. I mean, I remember when Apple was a company that was about to go bankrupt. And obviously they're not anywhere near that right now. If you look at the number of products that Apple makes, it's remarkably small for the size of the company. And especially if you compare it to a company like Dell that still makes a much, much broader set of products than Apple does. And so I've seen that where companies start to go faster, they have to go with less variety. And you see that with Amazon. So you can't get every product in 2 hours. You can only get the hits. So even there, I think there's a bit of a trade-off. That as companies push to go faster, they have to push to go faster with their most highest selling products, and they start to think maybe we need to pare down our product line in order to achieve that time, that speed. The other thing that it's happened with, especially sort of in the tech industry, is that faster is good when you have product obsolescence. Products are not getting obsolete nearly as fast as they used to. I know they still get obsolete, but the days of when an Intel microprocessor would be selling at $1,000 on January 1 and would be selling at $350 a year later are done. They're not. The component prices aren't falling in most industries that quickly. So I would temper for some companies and some industries, I think they might be moving a little too fast and they'll have to back up eventually. But no, this demand for going faster, that's been relentless, and I've heard it ever since, right? Yeah.
So do you think speed of execution could make a business model unique and viable?
Yes, right, definitely. I mean, uh, right now, uh, I would say Amazon's biggest advantage is the fact that they deliver tremendous amount of variety incredibly quickly. Um, and people are, and what they didn't used to want to pay margins for that. Now people pay margins for it. Amazon is no longer cheap. And as a result, everybody thinks they're cheap, but no, they're not actually. Their margins are pretty big. And as a result, it's just that they're damn convenient and people like the speed, and they don't even realize they're paying a little bit too much at Amazon now. And Amazon knows this. And so, of course, there are certain products that are people know exactly what the price is, so they'll keep the price competitive. But others, they take advantage of it. Now they're making money because of it. And they're making money because they're fast.
Right.
They
So
were not making money when they were slow.
so I wanted to give you a couple more examples that I see happening in China. I'm sure you heard of JD.com.
Yeah.
Yeah. JD.com, the major difference between JD.com and the B2C account from Alibaba called Taobao is JD runs their own delivery service.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that for that reason, JD has a huge amount of people employed. And right now in China, certain items, they already realize 4 hours of delivery, or sometimes even 2 hours if you're located in the big city, you're close by the warehouse, the distribution center. So that's amazing. 2 hours and 4 hours. So that's why I want to point out that JD. The difference is the JD, but JD is like Amazon in the early days. It doesn't make money. It just staying. It barely stay break even compared with Alibaba is making money, and so
yeah. The big difference I would say in terms of logistics between China and the United States is density. The number of people per square kilometer in a typical, even a small Chinese city is like a large city in the United States.
Right.
And when you have that level of density, that changes the calculation with respect to, does it make sense to do your own delivery or not? If you look at Amazon, Amazon is now investing in their own delivery capabilities because they don't think the UPS, FedEx, and the post office can deliver at their capacity level that they need. So they're buying planes, they're buying trucks. They didn't do that when they were smaller, but now Amazon is getting big enough to do it. But it's still, I mean, you can't take a rural town in the middle of Nebraska and own your own distribution network and make money. That distribution network has to be shared by everybody else. You take a city of 15 million, which is not even a huge city in China, and it's a pretty compact city. Now you can start investing in your own distribution network, and you can make sure that it's fully utilized. I mean, that's the trade-off. If you own an asset, you can control it, but you're also on the hook for making sure that the utilization of that asset is high. If you buy an asset and it sits around, that's wasted money. And the reason why like a Han Hai, a Foxconn, whatever, these contract manufacturers make money is they can because they share demand across manufacturers, different brands, their utilization could be higher than any of their customers can achieve on their own. And so those assets are never idle. And when the assets are not idle, they're cheaper. So that's if you're going to own an asset, you have to know that you can utilize that asset effectively. And in transportation, that's super important. Density is a key variable to ensure that you're going to be able to achieve high utilization. And so that's the, right now for me, that's the difference. The biggest difference between China and the United States in terms of logistics is the density issue. And that's not something that the United States is going, if you look at sort of per capita income of the customers, those will be, they're getting closer and closer. Density is I don't see the United States ever getting to the density of China anytime soon. And so fundamentally, the business models that work in China will not work in the United States as well, and vice versa. At least that's my reaction.
Hey, Raj, can I ask another question, or if you don't have anybody else?
Let's ask everybody. Anybody has any other question you want to ask? Gerard, also check the chat. I think there are a few questions here. And
I forgot to look at the chat here. Okay.
We also have 2 questions by the mail, which we got earlier.
Oh wow! I kind of got distracted and forgot to look at my chat. This chat here. So let me see. Physicist view. Least common denominator. Amazon's success is free shipping and next day or fastest delivery. It plays to people's impatience. I want it tomorrow. It appeals to people's sentiment through. No, illogical. I don't know if it's illogical. I don't know if that's illogical. I like things coming faster too, and it's so damn convenient. But you pay for it, and that's why they're starting to make money. More about the opportunities in education and healthcare. Opportunities in education. Look, healthcare is super expensive. Education is super expensive. Look, I get paid very well to be a professor at the Wharton School. Every lecture I give is unique, is distinctive. And my colleagues give different presentations than I do. Why? I mean, do we really need to have everybody giving talks about ops strategy in their own different way and having to invest in their own? Why can't we just have one presentation of ops strategy where hundreds of people give that same presentation to an audience? Now, you would say, oh, that's like a McMansion. That's like it's not, that's a pejorative way of saying standardization doesn't create value. Okay, but if you can create value with standardization, you don't have to hire people of my caliber who demand a high salary. You can dramatically lower your cost of the education if you do this. Same with healthcare. Physicians are expensive. And part of the reason why they're expensive is that they have specialized skills. Do you need that level of skills if you can standardize the process? So I think education and healthcare are ripe for somebody to come in with some kind of version of that. Let's see, Uber is a contradiction of Amazon. Not sure when people's sentiments are that I want to know now, but Uber makes you wait. So I think the market is not, well, Uber makes you wait. They track it. They track it very closely, and they try to make your wait as low as they can possibly be. And there's a lot of data that shows that waiting for an Uber is a lot less than what it used to be for waiting for a taxi. So especially if it's raining and it's 9 o'clock at night and you finish dinner, or 10 o'clock at night you finish dinner, there's data that they've definitely changed the game there. Yeah, okay, climate worse. Well, that's another interesting discussion. Amazon's going to charge $9.95 at the end of this month for deliveries. Yeah, because they're starting. When you generate, I mean, go back to that model I have. If you generate enough value, that you can then you can develop a revenue model that extracts that value, which allows you to buy the resources to generate that value. That nice virtuous cycle. Amazon's realizing now that they are in a position that they are generating value and they can start to extract it. Any comments on the impact of consumer privacy laws on business operations? That's a big deal right now, for sure. I think I saw today that Snap reported that, I think it was Snap, or maybe it was, I looked briefly at the Wall Street Journal today. It was I think it was Snap reported that the revenues are struggling because of Apple's new privacy decisions. I don't really get so much. I mean, I'm fascinated by that area. It's not so much where I get into because it's not so directly related to operations. What are the challenges you see in the supply chain in the next 10 years? Great. COVID, right? So COVID has, everybody's talking about COVID right now and how it has the great supply disaster that has created it. I'm a little flabbergasted by what's happened over the last year or two. mean, the best I can tell is what we had was everybody shut down and could not spend money on services. Everybody decided to start buying things. Because we actually can work from home, the economy didn't tank completely. So we had the money to do this and we had savings. And then we all started going out and buying stuff, but companies were not prepared for that. And it's not easy to just change your operations. If you sell toilet paper, that's a steady business. It's not like toilet paper demand goes up 25% one year and down 25% the next. Toilet paper is kind of a steady thing. You buy equipment that can put out a certain level of toilet paper, and that's it. Because why would you want to run these things idle? You can predict demand very easily. And then all of a sudden, you discover that demand for toilet paper completely changes because it turns out the machines that make toilet paper for homes is different than the machines that make toilet papers for the office. And while the total need for going to the bathroom is the same, people were going to the bathroom in different locations. And so you all of a sudden had all this capacity to make toilet paper for offices, not needed, and way not enough capacity to make toilet paper for consumers. Same thing happened in meat, and happened in a whole ton of industries. I didn't understand this until this happened. Was the packing lines in meat plants are set up for either restaurant cuts or for consumer cuts. They're not the same. And it wasn't easy to switch over from one to the other. Well, everybody was starting eating at home and nobody was eating in a restaurant. Wow, what a disaster that was. And so the ramifications from all of this has been tremendous. The semiconductor thing, well, all the auto companies cut all their orders back because they thought demand was going to tank. And then it didn't tank. And so they wanted to start making cars again. But the semiconductor companies started making different kinds of semiconductors. So then, boom, you have that problem right there. It might take a little while for this to all get resolved. And then I think what all this is doing is it's making people rethink globalization, right? And are they going to do more domestic production than they used to? I think they're going to lean a little bit in that direction, which will have ramifications. So yeah, next 10 years, I definitely think will be interesting with respect to where does people decide to locate their operations. And as Jason mentioned, I think the speed dimension is still going to continue to be there. We are doing supply chains and services for smart home products. Would like to know what good methods or techniques are there for managing supply of products from different factories more easily and systematically? That's a good question. And one that I am not so prepared. I would need to know more of the details and get into the weeds a little bit too much to give you a good answer on that one. But I mean, it's a good question. I just don't, I have to admit, I don't have a good answer for that one. So, but okay.
There's one more, Professor, there's one more about what are the latest trends and technologies for operation managers.
Now, what are some of the latest trends and technologies? Well, okay. The one that's probably the most interesting and sort of different, novel, cool is blockchain, distributed ledger technologies. And so, for example, there are now companies that are doing what Dropbox does, but now doing it via distributed ledgers. So there is no central coordination of the platform. There are companies that are using blockchain to do what Uber does, but without the Uber, which is essentially people go around and through this platform offer their services, and there's no central agent that's running the whole thing. It is still an open question about the viability of these platforms using this technology. Some of them will succeed because you just have to know that will. Some will fail. It's new and it's fascinating. So I would say blockchain is definitely something that has the potential to be transformative over the next couple of years. I would point to that. I mean, if you look at the last 10 years, I would say the obvious technology that's changed the last 10 years is mobile. The fact that everybody's walking around with a phone and they can communicate with their phone, that really has changed us as a society, as businesses, et cetera. phones now are not, I mean, okay, we all have them now. Okay. So now that's not, I mean, there's still progress and everything, but that's not so new. Blockchain, boy, that stuff is new. So that'll be fascinating.
All right. So actually we are running out of time now. Do you have any closing remark, Professor?
Yeah, I mean, thanks for the comments and thanks for listening. Hopefully somebody found this, somewhat interesting or useful, or I said one thing or two that they made them think a little bit, which is what professors like to do. So thank you.
Yeah, I think it was really useful. For me, operation management was really a complex topic, but how you kind of like made it so easy to understand, I'm like really amazed by that. So thanks a lot. Anybody else have any last question? We have time for one last question.
I have a question.
Yes.
Professor, so in designing of operation models for each new business, I'm in Silicon Valley, I'm doing that all the time. Is there a good recommendation from you? Because whenever we design something, we need to have a lot of operational data and to see what's the best way to have, as you discussed, the control and location and all that stuff. So what's a good place to go find operational data for business in the United States so we can take those data and put into our model and we can do simulations?
As it turns out, most companies don't reveal a lot of their data because it's too invaluable to pass around. As an operations professor, I'm frustrated with that because even when you want to work with a company, the lawyers come in and they say, okay, you can get this data, but we can sanitize it and blah, blah, blah. I wish I had a good answer for you on that one also. The best data is the data you have internally. There are ways of pulling some data in the public, but for a lot of stuff with new startups, when I have students starting a new business, they often ask me like, how can I find out what the cost of this will be? What would the reliability be? And I like, that's hard. It's a lot of sort of being a sleuth, talking to people, internal networks, seeing if somebody will give you some information here and there. But public, data that's easily to get, that's hard. It just is. Yeah.
All right. So thank you everybody for joining us tonight. And with that, I just want to end. Have a stress-free rest of the day. And I'll send you an email about feedback about the session, as well as if you have any questions, feel free to share. And once we have a recording of the session, we are going to share with all of you. So have a nice evening, guys.
Thank you. Thank you very much.